right, good morning, everyone. My name is Ben, and I am a lot more hungover than I was yesterday, so I hope you guys are not as bad as I am right now. So the subject today is Intune Programmatically, so provisioning Intune environments using Plaster and Azure DevOps. The idea behind this is that essentially we want to learn how to utilize the existing systems to make our job easier. If you're doing a lot of stuff with multiple clients, and I come from a consultancy background, so this doesn't necessarily work if you're only doing one and then maintaining it. But if you're doing multiple Intune rollouts, you want to leverage the configurations that you have already done so that you're not redoing the same thing over and over again, because that's just wasted time. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to utilize CI/CD pipelines in Azure DevOps. We're going to utilize Microsoft Graph and PowerShell Plaster templates to deploy pre-built Intune profile models, or modules rather. Okay, so overview, we're going to really quickly touch on Microsoft Graph. I did this yesterday. Just a really quick show of hands. How many people know what Microsoft Graph is? Okay, so everyone. So I won't spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I have called profile modules. It's not a real thing, it's just a way of thinking. And then we're going to talk on how we can use Azure DevOps to automate and manage Intune devices. A quick caveat, my virtual machine that I use for this demo is currently broken because I decided to reset it last night and it did not reset very well. So I don't get to show you the end result, but the concept still exists. Okay, so again, as I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what is Microsoft Graph? So Microsoft Graph is a RESTful API that sits over the top of everything in Azure. So if you want to access things like Teams, tasks, groups, or Intune, you use Microsoft Graph. It just makes it easy. You don't need to learn all the APIs for the other systems. You just understand what Graph is. It's easy to access that information, as I said. It's extensible, so you can put custom information into that and pull it out if you need to. And again, it's the one endpoint to rule them all. So there's no worries about having to learn other things. You just perfect Graph and you're good. Your job is excellent. Okay, so what are profile modules? As I said, it's not an official term. This is just a concept. The idea here is that every single time that you go and you set up an Intune environment, you have things like compliance baselines, configuration policies, PowerShell scripts, things like that. And a lot of the time I started realizing that I was setting up the exact same thing for every single client. So you sit down with them and you say, okay, what would you like? Do you want BitLocker? And they say, yes, I want BitLocker. And you go, okay, cool. I have to remember how I set BitLocker up. Things like that are very common, and in every other aspect of my job, I prioritize my working as tool building. So I spend a lot of time getting the first thing right so that I don't ever have to do it again. So I started thinking, can I do this for Intune? And the answer was yes. So basically every single device configuration or any setting that you apply in Intune is just a JSON object. So I was like, okay, cool. So maybe we can just build out the JSON object or create some templates to make my job easier. The benefit of this is that you get to pick and choose which settings that you want. So if you have a library full of like handy modules that you know always work, you get to go into your first meeting with your client and go, here's a bunch of things that you can have right now. What do you want? And they just go, I want this, I want this, I want this, and then you deploy it. It speeds that process up because, again, you're in that meeting and you say, like, what do you want? They say this, you can literally just apply that and deploy it out, and it's there immediately within like 20 seconds, or is even faster than that. And that makes you get to go back to enjoying your job because you don't have to keep remembering how to configure BitLocker or exactly what encryption keys you need to set up and things like that. That's my slides. I'm very sorry, but we're going to go straight into the demos. So I guess the first thing I want to show you is how we interface with Intune using Graph. So I've got this example here that's one of the main areas that we're talking about. So let me see if I can zoom in here. Okay, so this URL gives us access to all of the scripts that are in my Intune tenant. At the moment when I run this, I have nothing because I have a clean Intune environment. If I were to go in and just add a script or a configuration really quickly, so we go in PowerShell scripts, add. I can, yes. Give me 1 sec. Is that better? Yep, okay, great. So we're going to go, we'll just add anything, it doesn't matter at this point. Now I have to find something. Give me 1 sec. This is fun. If anyone's interested in how deploying PowerShell scripts works in this, come and see me after because it's really cool and it makes Intune a lot easier. But for now, I'm just going to breeze right past it. Okay, so we now have a PowerShell script in our Intune environment. I'm going to assign it to someone. Okay, so this is now deployed out to everyone in Intune baseline user, just immediately. Like within the next 5 minutes, every single person in this security group is going to get this script, it's going to run, and depending on what the script does, it's going to apply that. But what I'm more interested in now is, okay, so I've just done that manually. How do I know, like how can I get the metadata or the information on what I've just done? So if we go back into the Graph Explorer and we run the same script that gave us that nothing information originally, and we run it again, we start to see some information. So we have the idea of the device, which is just a unique GUID. We have the display name, description, run schedule, script content, all this sort of stuff. If we should actually be able to get that script content. Let me just quickly rerun this. I might not have the right permissions for it. Yeah, that's okay. So doing this, you sort of start to realize that every setting that you create in Intune is just a bunch of JSON manifests or metadata. So we go, okay, cool. So maybe if we start creating, if we start copying this information and we replace the actual hard code values with variables or expandable variables, we can start customizing it for a client experience. So that's where I've come in with this idea of profile modules. So I've gone in, I've got a script that is available on my GitHub that I'll share a link with later, that you can essentially set up your gold image and you can just extract all of the configuration information into a folder on your computer or in the cloud somewhere, and then you can use that as your gold standard. And then the next step is replacing the hardcode values with variables that will expand out. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about specifically using Plaster. So let me quickly show you. Okay, so this is my Plaster manifest. Show of hands, how many people use Plaster? Okay, quite a few of you. So, okay. The basic concept here is that I'm asking a couple of questions so that I can get some information to build out my templates. So who's the client? What is the client domain name? Are you setting up configuration policies, yes or no? If you are, it then asks you a couple of things about those configuration policies. So I've got a whole bunch of baked in things that I always use, and I'm going to ask those questions now, whether you want them or not. So the main thing is, do you want BitLocker? Do you want corporate branding? If you want corporate branding, where are the images stored? So when I talk about corporate branding, I'm talking about backgrounds, lock screens, things like that. Other stuff we've got here is device restrictions. Do we want basic device restrictions? And we're not getting super in depth here. This is just very basic stuff that like impresses the client, and it shows that Intune is good enough for them to actually use. We can start setting things like home pages in Edge or IE. We can start doing endpoint protection. We can start doing the corporate warning when you log into the machine. And that's basically it. We've got a whole bunch of other scripts as well. Now, Plaster's really good, it's fine, but we can't technically programmatically access this. And if I go to a meeting and I'm talking with someone and I just go, do you want this, this, and this? I don't want to have to open up PowerShell, run a Plaster manifest, and get that information. I want to make it even easier than that. So what I actually did is I created a YAML file that I create my variables that then go into that Plaster manifest. So this is just an example of how you can do it. There are other ways. You could create a function to get this information, but it's just, I think at the end of the day, YAML is very human readable. And if you show someone this, they understand what you're doing. So as opposed to that Plaster manifest file, which is just XML for days, the YAML file is very easy to read, and it's the exact same concept, right? So we have the client name, we have tenant domain, BitLocker, corporate branding, things like that. So once I've got that information, I've gone, okay, cool, so how do I want to build this out? So this is where I've actually got a build script that I put into a build pipeline in Azure DevOps to go consume the YAML file, put that information into my Plaster manifest, and then create the templates and deploy them. It sounds kind of complicated, but it really isn't. What I think I'll do is I'll just build it up now. Let's go into this one. So I'll just delete the example that I forgot to delete. Okay, so really quickly, the templates that I've got here. So I have one basic compliance policy that's essentially just make sure BitLocker's turned on, which is an easy one to just show people that compliance policies work. My configuration policies, I have a basic BitLocker object. I have some corporate branding, device restrictions, and endpoint protection. And then my scripts, I have things that currently don't exist in Intune natively, which is how to set time zone to auto, which still blows my mind that you need to customize that, but it will change eventually. We have things like enabling BitLocker on devices that aren't new, because at the moment it's very easy to do if you're on 1809 or 1903. Anything lower than that, you need to start doing some smarts around it. But we have code for that, and I have it all on my GitHub. We have silent configuration of OneDrive for Business, and we have some wallpaper scaling. If I go into the template just to show you how simple this stuff is, we'll go into corporate branding just to show you. I've got my Plaster variable, or my pre-expanded variables sitting here that are just waiting for that content to be thrown at it. And then when it's actually built out, this will be replaced with the actual value that the clients asked for or the clients provided. Everything else in here, we don't really change. It's just the basic blocks of how you configure this stuff. So we just leave that as default, and then we just modify the things that we need to. So if we go in and we've just had our meeting with our client and they're like, yep, cool, I love this, let's see how it all works. And the first thing you go is like, okay, what would you like? And they say, okay, we definitely want BitLocker. We definitely want some corporate branding. We definitely want some device restrictions, but we don't necessarily care about the endpoint protection. So we go, okay, not a problem. So we'll just delete that. And that's it, right? So that is now not going to apply. When we go in, so we've made that change, we're going to commit this. And this all works very fast because we're just talking text file like JSON data. And if we go into our pipelines, and I apologize, I'm not using the amazing new modern YAML environment. I'm using the old one because I didn't get time to change it. Let's go in here. That's done. maybe I don't have... I don't have continuous integration turned on. So normally what would happen is it would immediately build, but I turned that off while I was doing some testing. But that's now, this build environment is now running. So we'll just give it a sec. I'll show you how it looks, and then we can actually step through the build script, because it's actually not that complicated. So what we're doing here is we're just checking out the repository. It's not very big, so it shouldn't take very long at all. We're going to start publishing those profiles, and that's already done. So we've already, oh, sorry, we're grabbing the required modules now. So the required modules that we're talking about here are how do we work with YAML in PowerShell, because natively that doesn't exist. And one more thing, let me open up my build scripts. Plaster. So when you build up your environment, it doesn't natively have Plaster, so we need to set that up as well. So as you can see here, we've got Plaster. It's building out the template environment in a folder called EUC powers hell. And we're simply posting all of that information into Intune. And that's done. So I've just now scaffolded out an Intune environment by clicking one button, changing one file. If we go into our environment, and we go device configuration, PowerShell scripts, we have all of those things. They all exist right now. Now, I haven't assigned them, and that's by design, because it's very dangerous to assign scripts to a production environment, because that means that they will immediately deploy. So I generally try to err on the side of populate the environment, but you have to manually deploy these things still, because it's just safe. It's very dangerous to deploy things to a production environment. But we'll just also show you. So the profiles that we've created, we've got that Win10 BitLocker, corporate branding, device restrictions. The BitLocker, for an example, it's only 10-ish settings, but I can never remember which ones need to be done. And this is kind of the main driver of why I did this. So if we go into Windows encryption, we can see immediately we've just gone, cool. It's required that we encrypt devices. It's required that we do these things. We've defined exactly what the encryption settings are, and it's very easy to change this stuff. You literally just modify it and then rechange your templates. Okay. Man, I really wish my virtual machine was working. Okay. So that's very simple, right? And I'm talking about this and saying, oh, it's so simple, but like, how does the build environment work? Or like, prove to me that it is that simple. So my build script at the moment, is this big enough for everyone to see at the back? It's okay? A little bigger? Perfect. Of course there's an update. So if we scroll down to the absolute bottom, I've got 194 lines of code, which maybe sounds like a lot, but what I'm really doing is not actually that complicated. So I guess I'll just step through this process now. So the first thing that happens is we're installing the basic modules needed to access or to work with YAML and Plaster. And then once we've got that, we're getting the content of YAML. And then we're setting up a couple of environment areas. The next couple of things here, we're talking just about functions. I have a basic function for authenticating into Graph without a user interface, which is actually quite easy, and I'm kind of proud of this one because it makes it very, very easy, where we're just building out the body of the request instead of using any built-in DLLs. We're just going, I understand how to create the request, let's manually create that. So we're talking, we've got a resource URL, an ID of the application we're connecting to. In this case, it's the default Intune GUID that is provided by Microsoft. We're setting a password, and that's it. it comes back with a token, we can access Graph. The next thing we're doing is I've got a basic function here for add device management. And this is where it gets, I guess I can show you how simple this stuff is. So all of this module, all this function does is it says, what do we want to add? Is it a configuration item? Is it a compliance item? Or is it a script item? The difference between those things are the endpoints in Graph, and they are these here. So if I zoom in, so if I want to do configuration, it's just device configurations. If I want to do compliance, it's device compliance policies. If I want to upload a script, it's management scripts. So if I get this information, again, just to show you how easy this is, and go back into my Explorer, and I simply change this with device configurations. So again, I'm just doing a get here because I just want to see the data. I can see all this information here. Let me see if this will work. So this is one of the device restriction policies that we just automatically built out. It's got that JSON data that we created ourselves, we threw into Intune, and now we can access it through the API. So all my function is doing is, instead of doing a get on that REST API, it's doing a post, which we can see here. The method is post. We're throwing in the token for Graph at the end, just here. And the body is the JSON data that we've created from our YAML file and our Plaster template that's been created for us. That's it, and that's why it's so quickly. I've got a couple of, I've put all this in a try-catch statement so that I could handle any errors that came up, but really you're just talking about basic connectivity issues. Or if you haven't configured the JSON object correctly, you'll get a malformed JSON error. So again, stepping through this, we've got our basic authentication process. So we've got a username, a password, a tenant ID, a resource, and an application ID. We're authenticating. We're creating the auth header. This looks complicated, and it can be a lot easier, but I did this, I got very excited about YAML, so I just went, oh cool, let me just create a way to get the information from YAML and make it into a usable object. So all I'm doing is essentially just dot tracing through arrays, because that's all YAML does. It's flat file data that turns into arrays. So all I'm doing is just creating the parameters needed for creating that JSON object through Plaster. So my Plaster expects all of this information, so the client name, client domain, config policy, all that sort of stuff. And all these things are the questions that Plaster is asking. I'm providing the answers programmatically. And then we're uploading the device configuration. So once Plaster has created its environment, it just steps through every single object that it's created, and it throws it into that function that I just showed you before. What I'm also doing, and this is interesting, and I want to spend a little bit more time on this once I actually get time to sit down. But what I'm doing is I'm creating a little bit of log data in the build environment to show what happened. So not only do I, yes, I know that it worked, but we want to be able to have some test data to show that it worked. So if I go into my build, so we know that this was successful. That's fantastic. Let's have a look here. I apologize, the UI changed because I'm in a different country and Australia is very behind. Here's an example. Nope. That's not going to show. Oh, won't spend any more time on this if I can't get it working. Changes, duration. Oh, here it is. It's just called extensions for some reason. It used to be called status or information. But basically, so what I'm doing here just to show you is all of the policies that we created programmatically. I'm just going, give me that JSON data, spit it out onto a window so that for the client to confirm that this stuff actually happened, we've got the entire JSON payload that got sent into Azure, which is, there's a lot of stuff in here, and I could maybe do it in a markdown environment so it's easier to read. But every single configuration, profile, compliance policy, script, all of these things exist in the build status permanently, so that at any time you can go back and see what was actually deployed. So if someone else gets access to your build environment that maybe shouldn't be doing what they're doing, they can change the YAML file, or they change what's going to go out. You've got proof of what actually changed, which I think is kind of cool, and it saves me on a daily basis. Okay, how are we going for time? Okay, so I'm gonna wrap up. I'm really sorry if this is quick. I did this on the fly. So in summary, configuring Intune is easy. It's really, really easy. If you spend the time creating your gold standard and just looking at the data through Graph, you understand how simple it is. The next step is to actually just capture that data and start looking at it yourself and going, how can I expand on this? So I have the capture code available on the GitHub repo for this demo. If anyone wants it, it's freely available and it's very simple. The next thing, obviously, is Graph is your friend. Spend time learning it. So again, all of the things that I'm doing here are very simple, but it's only simple because Graph is so easy to use. If it wasn't, I'd need to spend a lot more time understanding what the API was, and it wouldn't be fun. So Graph makes it easy. It is your friend. The more time you spend learning it and understanding it, your job will be so much easier. Next one, PowerShell makes Intune amazing. Intune on its own is a fantastic replacement for SCCM in an environment that maybe doesn't have SCCM or an environment that wants to modernize. Out of the box, it can do almost everything you need, but there are times where you hit a brick wall and go, I can't currently do that, I wish I could. With PowerShell, you can do that. As long as your devices are only AADJ or Azure Active Directory domain joined and not hybrid, that's a big important thing to say, because if it's hybrid joined, you cannot run PowerShell scripts natively. If it's AADJ, you can, which means that if you hit that brick wall where you can't make a configuration item or you can't do something like set the time zone as auto, you can just do it in PowerShell. When you deploy it through PowerShell, you have the option to choose the context, whether it's system or user. So the options of what you can do are limitless. You just need to sit down and go, how much time do I want to invest in coming up with this solution, knowing that eventually it will exist in Intune. So PowerShell essentially makes Intune the perfect solution for managing devices. The next one is start out small. So as I showed in the demo there, we made some changes. We deployed a couple of configuration items, but we didn't do a lot. It was more just to show, yeah, cool, let's turn BitLocker on, let's do this, let's do this. But we didn't make any drastic changes because, like any environment, you want to do a couple of small things first, make sure they work, then start making major additions. One of the most interesting things I've found in doing Intune deployments for a number of companies is the first thing people want to do is replace their entire group policy into Intune. And I say, no, no, no. Your group policy has probably been existing there for like 10 years and it's full of stuff that no one understands. It's super complex. You've probably got conflicting things that, one thing applies something and another thing defines it. What we're essentially saying is let's start fresh. And this is use the defaults until you need to change it. So it's the same concept as starting out small. Do everything you can to not do that much. And then when you absolutely need to make a change, that's when you do it. So when we're rolling out Intune for people, we start with what is called a technical validation. So we set up what we perceive the important things are, and that's what that initial YAML file is. We go, do you want BitLocker? Do you want this? They say yes. We go, is that all? They say yes. We go, not a problem. Commit the code in, build out the environment, and say, here's the device, have it for a week. Try and break it. And if it doesn't break, I don't believe you, because you've never had this machine and you're trying to use it in your environment. But like, make a list of all the things that don't work and then come back to me in a week. We'll discuss what the problems are, and then we start making those iterative changes. That way you can build out an environment that everyone trusts and you can support it that way. Exactly what I'm saying here. So introduce small configuration changes. Don't do everything at once, because you won't remember what you did and you won't know what broke it. So do one thing at a time, get the client or your end users to validate that it works. Wait a day, wait until they say it's broken, make the change to fix it, and then just continue on. This is not a unique thing to Intune. This is just the way we should be working, full stop. Don't make drastic changes, just do a small thing and then monitor it going forward. Okay, so that's my thing. That's it. All the demo code that I did is available on my GitHub, which is just here. Do we have any questions?
On the authentication part in your build script,
yep.
You provide a username and a password.
Yes.
Can you also make it work with two-factor authentication?
Okay, so the question was, with my unattended authentication function, can I make it work with 2FA or two-factor authentication? The answer is no. If you have something, but that's by design, okay? If you have a system that has two-factor authentication, the idea here is that it stops malicious attacks. So essentially, an unattended authentication is a malicious attack, right? Because I can authenticate without anyone seeing it. So what you need to do in this case is create a service account that bypasses 2FA. And if you can't get that, you can't do this, unfortunately. A lot of the things that you can do in Intune, if you go in, you create your application, you've got two options. You can do delegated access and you can do application access. The difference between that, delegated takes on the persona of who logged in. So like if you put your credentials in and you log in, it's delegated to what you have access to, whereas you can do application, and then it's essentially just like a daemon or a service that runs. You don't have as much information available to you as an application, so things like what I just did, you can't do in a daemon environment, because at the end of the day, it's very dangerous. So it's just that sort of trust that you need. So yeah, if you can set up a service account that bypasses 2FA, and then just say, this is what it is. You can hide the credentials so no one else knows what they are. Put them in a key vault, store the password in your build environment, set it as a secret, and no one will ever know how to log in. That's it.
Can you go back one slide?
I can, yes. This one? Sure.
Can you talk a little bit more about Plaster itself?
Yes, but okay, so the question was, can I talk a little bit more about Plaster itself? I can. I'm not the be-all and end-all on this. I use it to get myself out of a wet paper bag, and that's kind of it. So Plaster is essentially, it was initially designed to help you build PowerShell modules and like PSD1s and you know the entire environment. So you go, I'm building a project. My module name is this, and it will just build out the module for you. The benefit of that is that people were just like, oh, hang on, this is like just like XML questions. So let me bring it up and I'll show you. It's also Plaster will, like, you can create a lot of this programmatically as well by just going invoke Plaster or new Plaster manifest, and it will just build most of this for you. So not a lot of this is actually complex. We've got the name of the Plaster template, which is Intune loadout. We have a unique ID, the version number, which you can change for each iteration, the title, a basic description, who wrote it, some tags so that you can identify. And then all we're doing here in the parameters is we're defining the questions that the end user will have. So I can actually run this and show you what the Plaster experience is, right? So without YAML. So let's go. No, I'll do. Is this readable for everyone? Does it need to be a little bit bigger? Yeah, okay, thank you. So we go invoke Plaster. Template path is the Intune Plaster builder. So this is just the root directory of where your template and that XML file exists. The destination is obviously wherever you want the output, because all it's doing is creating like a scaffold for you to then work with, right? So let's just say we're going to put it in the root of where we're running it from. We open this up, and you can see here, so who is the client? By default, I've set it as PowerShell, or PowerShell rather. If we go in and we have a look at the parameter set, so this is literally just reading line 14, and it's saying, who is the client? The default answer is PowerShell. The variable name is client name. So essentially what it's doing is when you're filling this out, it's creating a series of variables with the values that you're entering. So it's kind of like readline, but like way more complex and way more like expandable. So we go in here and we go psconf EU. What is the client domain? Are you setting up configuration policies? We'll say yes. BitLocker? No, I don't want BitLocker today. Corporate branding? Sure, why not? Where is the desktop image stored? It's on Google. Why not? Same thing. Bing. Device restrictions, do we want those? Yes. What's the homepage? Endpoint protection? No, I don't care about protecting my endpoints. It's fine. Are you setting up compliance policies? Again, we'll say no. Do I want to deploy all of these things? So like, I've set it up very complex because I don't ever really want to work with this anymore. I want it to just be programmatic. So you can make it a lot easier and you can answer these questions by default, but we'll just run through and we'll say, we'll just follow the defaults. So these are all the scripts. We're just asking, do we want to run these scripts? And then we're building from the templates, and you can see what's been created. And if we go into our environment, we can see a folder has been created here called EUC psconf EU. And inside here, we have configuration and we have scripts. So if we go into the corporate branding, we can see the desktop image URL and the lock screen URL have been put into our template. So the idea behind this is that, yes, the JSON manifest data for these things is complex, but with this solution, you don't need to know how that works. You create your template once, put in the variables, and those variables, again, I've shown this before, but I'll show them again. So the same example, Win10 corporate branding, we'll go into the actual template and I'll show you the difference between the expanded variable and the placeholder. That's what the essentially the placeholder value looks like. So Plaster is basically going through and looking for these things and replacing them. So it's just Plaster param desktop image URL. And if we go back into our Plaster, we can see here that we've defined the variable name as desktop image URL. So it's really that simple to set up. I highly recommend if you haven't played with it, spend a little bit of time. There's a lot of documentation on the internet about doing things with this. I'm primarily doing at the bottom here template deployment. So it's specifically telling Plaster that there are things in these files that I want you to replace with the value of the parameter. But you can also just do like file copies, so you can like stand out just files in locations without actually touching them. You're just creating you can do folders, files, whatever. But the template stuff is really cool because it allows you to like modify the file automatically. And we can talk about this more later. Okay. Any more questions?
How much work is it? Because you now have the build pipeline
Yep.
set up for your tenant.
Yep.
How much work is it to do it on a different tenant? Because this is something you'll do for a customer, so you have to set that bit up first.
Yeah, so I guess the build pipeline mentality is like one that's good to show, but if you were going to do this as an ongoing thing, you would maybe create an extension or a task that you could pull down and just go into their tenant and go, oh, I've already created this stuff, let's just install that. But even if you were to go down the same route of creating the build pipeline again, you just do it as a YAML file, right? So again, the idea here is an overarching concept of do it once, do it properly, and then reuse that content. Because everything that you're doing in IT is tool building. So if you need to do the same thing multiple times and you're not just reusing the existing stuff that you've already done, you're wasting your time. So like, understand what you're doing, make it a tool, so remove the hard-coded variables and all that sort of stuff and make it like functional so that you can use it in a different environment. And you're not only making your job easier, but you can give it to other people. Yeah. Cool. Any more questions? Okay.